All right, folks, I skipped yesterday because, let's face it, I would have wanted to talk about the debate, but the debate hadn't happened yet. So there's no real point in me recording a pregame show when it was only the kids' debate anyway. There wasn't a whole lot riding on last night. But I do still think that the event itself was entertaining and the results were interesting, and I think it is going to have an impact on the campaign. What I had said previously in past videos is that last night was going to be about DeSantis versus Vivek, and DeSantis has fallen considerably, as we all know. He has collapsed down to barely second place. He's now basically neck and neck for second place in a lot of polls, or even behind in some, with Vivek. And one of those two guys was going to want to beat or both of these guys, I should say, was going to end up on top. They're going to try and beat each other down and become the true second place candidate. And obviously the first place guy wasn't on the stage, so they couldn't really compete with him. It was just all of the low tier candidates in a room punching each other out. And I have to say it was better than I would have expected. There was some real substantive differences that was articulated between these different people. You got to see the terrible things that the likes of Nikki Haley and Mike Pence and Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson and Doug Burgum, what they believe. Of course, I think that most of them actually did a better job than I would have expected as far as not looking awful. Most of the candidates, I felt like, were able to answer questions directly, and if you were unfamiliar with them and you were unfamiliar with the situations and you were just generally a low information voter watching these and you had no idea who any of these guys were, I think that most of these guys on the stage didn't hurt themselves. Now, did they do anything to make themselves stand out? Is Asa Hutchinson going to surge after this debate? No, absolutely not. And Chris Christie, being his usual self, he's basically the same person he was on the debate stage back in 2016. He's just up there to snipe at the other candidates and Trump, of course, and to talk about how bad he is. That didn't really get Chris Christie any positive poll numbers back in 2016. He wasn't able to climb his way up in the polls, but he was able to bring other people down. And it was clear one of his targets last night was Vivek, who he has a big problem with because, of course, Vivek does not want to invade Ukraine. He does not want to start World War III with Russia. And he also doesn't want to start World War III with China. Nikki Haley was very offended that Vivek was, I guess, less than 100% loyal to Israel and was not willing to sell his own kidney to fund Israeli expeditions into Gaza. And generally speaking, most of the candidates kind of acted like Vivek was the front runner, or at least you would think. If you were an onlooker and you had no idea what the poll results were and you had no idea who any of the people on the stage were, you probably would have guessed Vivek was the front runner. He was front and center, and he was the one taking the most flack, and he was also the one who was making himself heard the most. I thought he did very well. He was under, that's an environment that I think he hasn't been in before, where he's surrounded by a bunch of people who are, against him, and he has to try and, keep his cool and come up with, good lines to retort against everyone. And he wasn't just doing it when he was addressed. He was interjecting as much as possible, trying to make himself heard, which is more than I can say for Ron DeSantis, who was, I think, much more measured in his approach, but that also made it harder for him to stand out, and he really needed to last night. DeSantis had a couple of good moments, like with the climate change thing when Fox News said, "By a show of hands, who here accepts that climate change is real?" And DeSantis, before everyone had a chance to put their hands up or not put their hands up, DeSantis had a good line. He said, "Hey, we're not school children here. How about we actually have a debate instead of a show of hands? Oh, do you think climate change is real?" That was a good moment. I'll give DeSantis that. I think that he looks like he's lost weight, which is good. He looked much thinner. Um, that's important on TV. You know, when you're Chris Christie, now Fox was a little nicer to Chris Christie than, let's say, in 2016 when Chris Christie was on the end of the debate stage. You know, so his podium was kind of tilted a little bit so that he was facing the other candidates, and you could just see his entire, his whole rear. You could see a, what's it called? Not a side view, profile of Chris Christie. That's not a good look. They didn't do that to him as much in this debate. So Chris Christie could have looked fatter. I'm serious. But anyway, DeSantis did not look fat or bulky at all. So points on him for that, for getting into a little bit better shape. And who knows, maybe it was all muscle under there. Even if it was, he just kind of looked bulky, and especially considering he's orange, it made him look a bit like a Guido or a Goomba, whatever the correct terminology is. And so the rest of these people on the stage, other than Vivek and DeSantis, I don't think really mattered, although I think there were probably multiple candidates who stood out more during this debate than DeSantis. And I'm not even counting Vivek. I mean, he clearly far and away stood out the most. He got the most attention. He got the most screen time, I think. He was able to interject the most. DeSantis, not so much. Nikki Haley, I think, tried to make herself stand out, although not really in a good way. And then, of course, there was Mike Pence. And Mike Pence got addressed directly quite a bit because he was the former vice president. And when you watch Mike Pence talk, it's kind of like a time capsule. It's like looking into the past. Because when he talks, it's like it sounds like he's running in the year 2012 or 2008 or 2006 or 2004. And like he believes every word that he's saying. You know, it's just kind of his tone and the look in his eyes. And of course his hair. It's just like, this is a 2000s man right here. And it almost makes you nostalgic. But then you remember that, Mike Pence has not been great when he's actually been in positions of power. He completely folded on religious liberty and stabbed the religious right in the back when he was governor of Indiana, which is a strange thing to do when you're in the state of Indiana, which has a, Christian conservative supermajority, and you're supposed to be Mr. Faith guy. It's a weird thing to stab them in the back. And then when he was vice president, he stabbed the Trump supporters in the back by saying, essentially, we're going to fight on this nonstop, on January the 5th. And then on January 6th, he's like, yeah, actually, Biden won, and there's nothing I can do about it. So, you do that twice. You betray the base on two big occasions, on like the two most pivotal moments of your career when you have been in a position of power and had the power to make a difference for your supporters, and you stab them in the back twice. I don't think you get a third chance. Asa Hutchinson, even though he was absolutely murdered by Tucker Carlson back when Tucker interviewed him, he managed to not step into a bear trap this time. And I think that's probably because, his views tend to align with the Fox editorial staff pretty closely, so they didn't really have anything to attack him on. But again, kind of who cares? Most of these guys up here, nobody's considering voting for, and the viewership last night, I have not seen it ratings. Without Trump up there, you're not going to get that many eyeballs on you to begin with. So there were no breakouts of this debate except for potentially Vivek. Some people will decide they don't like him. He's apparently becoming a bit polarizing. A lot of people find him very disingenuous, which I can see. I can definitely see that. I don't know that he's the most genuine guy in the world. I'm not saying that. But I will say that he at least is telling me things I want to hear, which is more than I can say for the average Republican. And so, I think there's maybe a bit of potential for him to get a bump out of this, potentially at the expense of DeSantis, because DeSantis just did not have that many great moments, and he overall did not seem, well, I don't want to call him low energy, because when he came alive, he was alive, but for most of the time there, he kind of did seem low energy. He was just kind of there. I mean, there were moments going back and forth, between Pence and Vivek, but you really didn't have DeSantis and Vivek and DeSantis and Pence. I mean, but it was like DeSantis, I kept noticing him because he was right there between the two who were actually having a debate. And I mean, this hilarious notion from Nikki Haley and Mike Pence that, because Vivek said, we can't protect Ukraine's border and our border. And Pence and Haley were like, we could do both. I mean, like, that's the hill they want to die on. That's what they're real passionate about. No. We absolutely, to the last American, we're going to defend Ukraine's border and we're going to defend the southern border. It's like, one of those two things is not happening, and I think I know which one based on past performance. So it was silly and fun, and no one will remember this debate in a few months. But the first debate in a primary season is always a fun event for me. And so I don't know how many more of these they'll even have. I would like to see after this some people start dropping out, but sadly you have all these people who want to wait until Iowa and New Hampshire, which really just clutters up the field. I mean, we already know that Trump is going to be the eventual nominee, but it's like, can we narrow it down to at least a few people? Can we have a few less also-rans? Because even DeSantis and Vivek are never going to, ascend above the status of an also-ran. So, that's where I sit with this debate. With that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.